My name is Evelyn Parker, and for most of my marriage, I learned how to disappear quietly. I learned how to smile when my opinions were ignored, how to nod when decisions were made without me, and how to make myself smaller so my husband could feel larger. I was a housewife, at least that is what everyone thought. And for a long time, I let them think that was all I was. Before I begin, if you enjoy cinematic, emotional storytelling about hidden strength, quiet power, and the moments that expose the truth, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And as you listen, ask yourself how many people in your life have mistaken your silence for weakness. My husband's name is Richard. From the outside, our marriage looked respectable. We lived in a comfortable suburban home, attended company events together, hosted dinners, and smiled for holiday photos. Richard worked for a large manufacturing company and loved to talk about his job. He loved titles, meetings, and being seen as important. When people asked what I did, he usually answered for me. "She's just a housewife," he would say with a chuckle, as if it were a harmless joke. Just a housewife. The words followed me everywhere. At first, I told myself it did not matter. I chose to stay home when our children were young. I managed the household, raised our kids, handled schedules, bills, school meetings, and emergencies. I was the one who kept everything running smoothly so Richard could focus on his career. I thought partnership meant division of roles. What I did not realize was that while I was building a foundation, Richard was slowly building a sense of superiority on top of it. Over the years, his jokes became sharper. When friends visited, he would laugh and say, "Evelyn wouldn't understand, she doesn't work in the real world." At dinners, he would explain things to me slowly, like I was a child. If I disagreed, he would wave it off and say, "You worry about the house. I'll handle the important stuff." I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I believed that keeping peace was more important than being right. And because I knew something Richard did not. Long before I became just a housewife, I had built something of my own. Years ago, before we were married, I had inherited a small but struggling family business from my father. He trusted me, not because I was loud or aggressive, but because I paid attention. I studied finance at night, learned operations from the ground up, and slowly turned that company around. When Richard and I married, I made a decision. I kept my ownership private. Not out of deception, but out of protection. I had seen how money changed people, how power distorted relationships. I placed the company in a trust, hired professional management, and stayed behind the scenes. The business grew steadily. Quietly. By the time Richard was hired there years later, it had become one of the company's largest shareholders. He never knew. And I never told him. Because I believed love should not depend on leverage. Over time, my role at home became my public identity. Richard's confidence grew as mine faded in his eyes. He began to mock me openly. One evening, after he came home late from work frustrated, he tossed his briefcase on the table and said, "You have no idea how stressful my life is. Try dealing with real pressure instead of laundry and grocery lists." I looked at him and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Clarity. But I still said nothing. The breaking point came at a company dinner, one of those polished events where spouses were invited to celebrate a successful quarter. The room was filled with executives, managers, and their partners. Richard was in his element, laughing loudly, shaking hands, soaking in the attention. I stood beside him, calm, observant, invisible. During dinner, someone asked how we met. Richard launched into the story, then added, "Evelyn decided to stay home. She's not really into business." People smiled politely and turned back to him. Later, after a few drinks, Richard leaned toward me and whispered, not quietly enough, "You're lucky you married me. Otherwise, you'd still be just a housewife with no idea how the world works." The table laughed. Something inside me went still. I did not feel humiliated. I felt finished. Finished pretending. Finished shrinking. Finished protecting a man who had never protected my dignity. I looked at Richard, really looked at him, and realized he had no idea who I was. Not because I hid myself, but because he never cared to see. That night, as we drove home, he complained about work, about incompetent colleagues, about how no one appreciated him enough. I listened in silence, already knowing that the world he built on mockery and arrogance was about to meet something he could not laugh away. Because the company he believed gave him status was, in truth, built on foundations he never imagined. And the housewife he mocked was not as powerless as he believed. I went to bed that night with a calm I had not felt in years. I knew I did not need to shout, threaten, or expose myself recklessly. Power, real power, does not announce itself. It waits. And soon, Richard was going to learn the difference between being loud and being in control. The next morning, Richard acted like nothing happened. That was one of his talents, the ability to wound someone and then step over the damage as if it were a minor inconvenience. He kissed me on the cheek, grabbed his coffee, and scrolled through his phone while talking about a huge week ahead at work. He mentioned a potential promotion, a leadership role, maybe even a relocation to the corporate office downtown. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed the world was built to reward him. I watched him from the kitchen doorway and felt something in me settle into place, not rage, not bitterness, but resolve. I had spent years trying to preserve our marriage by smoothing his edges, by absorbing the sharpness so our children would not feel it. But our children were grown now. The house was quieter. And I no longer had a reason to keep my own voice locked away. That afternoon, I drove to a small office building across town, a place I had visited only a handful of times in person over the years. The sign outside did not have my name on it. It never had. That was the point. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and efficient. People greeted me warmly, not because they feared me, but because they respected the consistency of what I had built. I met with the company's CEO, a steady woman named Marissa, and our legal counsel. We discussed quarterly performance, supply chain shifts, and a recent report about a division with rising internal complaints. I listened, asked questions, and took notes. Halfway through the meeting, Marissa slid a folder toward me. "It's about the manufacturing company," she said carefully. "The one we hold a significant stake in. Richard's company. My husband's company." The folder contained summaries, board notes, and an internal review request. There were issues in operations, employee retention, and a few departments where management style was becoming a liability. The language was professional, but the meaning was clear. The company was bleeding talent in certain areas. The reason was not difficult to guess. I opened the pages and saw the name of a department manager mentioned several times. Richard's name. Not as the central figure, but as a pattern. "There have been complaints," Marissa said. "Not about performance metrics, but about culture. Disrespect. Condescension. Humiliation." I felt my jaw tighten. The same personality he brought home, he brought to work. The same mockery. The same need to be above others. Marissa studied my expression. "We can intervene quietly," she said. "But the board meeting is next week. They want to address leadership risk." I nodded slowly. "Do not do anything yet," I replied. "Just keep gathering facts." That night, Richard came home energized, talking about a meeting where he put someone in their place. He seemed proud of it. He described a junior analyst who disagreed with him, and how he shut them down in front of the team. He laughed while telling the story. "These kids think they know everything," he said. "They need to learn how the real world works." I looked at him and felt something cold and clear. "And do you feel better after humiliating someone?" I asked calmly. He blinked, surprised by my tone. "It's not humiliation," he said, defensive. "It's leadership." I nodded once. "If you say so." He frowned. "What is with you lately?" he asked. "You are acting different." "Maybe I am," I said softly. "Maybe I am tired of being spoken to like I am beneath you." He rolled his eyes and waved his hand. "Here we go," he muttered. "I cannot deal with this after the week I've had." He walked into the bedroom, shutting the door a little too hard. I sat at the kitchen table alone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of him moving around like the house existed to absorb his moods. I thought about the board meeting next week. I thought about the folder in Marissa's hand. I thought about the complaints. And I understood that what was coming was not revenge. It was reality. The following days, Richard's arrogance grew sharper, like he could sense the promotion nearing and wanted to dominate everything around him. He criticized how I folded laundry. He complained about dinner being too simple. He scoffed when I suggested he take a break, calling me sheltered. Each comment was small, but together they formed a pattern that made my stomach twist. One evening, he came home with a smug smile and said, "Guess who is being considered for a senior leadership role? Me. I told you. I am moving up." He poured himself a drink and added casually, "If I get it, you'll need to step it up, Evelyn. Corporate wives need to look a certain way." I stared at him. "Corporate wives," I repeated. He shrugged. "You know. Appearances." The word made my chest tighten. Appearances. The same excuse he used when he mocked me, when he dismissed me, when he treated people like props. I stood slowly, walked over, and took the glass from his hand. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I am taking this," I said calmly, setting it in the sink. "Because you are not speaking to me like that." His face flushed. "You are a housewife," he said sharply, the words spitting out like a weapon. "You do not get to tell me how to behave." There it was again. Just a housewife. My pulse stayed steady. "I am your wife," I corrected. "And you will respect me." He laughed, short and cruel. "Respect is earned," he said. "And you have not earned anything. You stay home. You spend my money. You would be nothing without me." The words should have shattered me. Years ago, they might have. But now they felt like confirmation. Proof that he had no idea who I was, and proof that he had never deserved the version of me that kept forgiving him. I walked past him, went to the bedroom, and began packing a small bag. Not to leave forever, not yet, but to remind myself I had options. Richard followed, furious. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Trying to be dramatic?" I folded a sweater calmly. "I am preparing," I said. "For what?" He scoffed. "For the day you push too far," I replied, meeting his gaze. He stared at me for a long moment, thrown off by the steadiness in my voice. Then he turned away, muttering insults under his breath, slamming drawers, making noise like a child. I zipped the bag, placed it in the closet, and went back to the kitchen. Richard stayed quiet the rest of the night, not because he understood, but because he could not control a woman who no longer begged to be treated well. 2 days before the board meeting, Marissa called me. Her voice was calm but firm. "We have more information," she said. "There is a complaint that escalated. It involves Richard." My stomach tightened. "What kind of complaint?" I asked. "Harassment and intimidation," she answered. "A subordinate reported repeated public humiliation. Another corroborated. Human resources is involved." I closed my eyes. Of course. Richard's cruelty was not limited to our home. "The board wants to address it immediately," Marissa continued. "There is a leadership review meeting tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. Earlier than expected. I inhaled slowly. "Send me the details," I said. "And schedule my attendance." Marissa paused. "Do you want your identity revealed?" she asked carefully. "Not yet," I replied. "Not until I choose the moment." That night, Richard came home excited, talking about his presentation, his chance to impress the executives. He practiced his speech out loud while I cooked dinner, pacing the living room like a man rehearsing for a crown. At one point, he stopped and looked at me. "You know," he said, smug, "tomorrow is a big day for me. Maybe you should try being supportive instead of moody." I turned the stove down and faced him. "Richard," I said evenly, "tomorrow will be a big day." He smiled, satisfied, thinking he had one. "That's right," he said. "It will." I did not correct him. I did not warn him. Because some lessons cannot be taught with words. They must be lived. And tomorrow, in the place where Richard believed he held power, he was going to learn exactly how little he understood about the woman he mocked at home. The morning of the board meeting arrived quietly. There was no dramatic music, no thunder in the sky, no sign from the universe warning Richard of what was coming. He woke up confident, dressed carefully in his tailored suit, adjusted his tie in the mirror, and smiled at his own reflection like a man certain of his place in the world. As he grabbed his briefcase, he glanced at me and said, "Wish me luck," not because he needed it, but because he expected it. "Good luck," I replied softly, and for the first time, those words carried a meaning he could not hear yet. After he left, I dressed with intention. Not extravagantly, not to impress, but with clarity. A simple blazer, neutral tones, hair pulled back, the version of myself I used when decisions mattered. I drove separately to the corporate building downtown, parked in the executive garage I rarely used, and took the elevator up to the top floor. The receptionist greeted me by name. Richard had never noticed that detail when we attended events together. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Executives sat around the long table, documents neatly arranged, faces serious. Marissa nodded at me as I took my seat near the head of the table. The meeting began with formalities, then moved quickly to the issue everyone knew was coming. Leadership conduct. Workplace culture. Risk management. Richard entered halfway through, slightly late, flushed but smiling, unaware that the room had already shifted. He took a seat near the middle, glanced around, and froze when he saw me. Not because he recognized authority yet, but because I did not belong there in his mind. His eyes narrowed, confusion flashing across his face. After a few minutes, the chair of the board cleared his throat and addressed the room. He spoke about the importance of respect, accountability, and the long-term health of the company. Then he turned to the issue of a specific department and named Richard directly. Richard straightened, preparing to defend himself, confident in his charm. Complaints were summarized. Patterns described. Language used carefully but unmistakably. Richard interrupted, dismissive, calling it exaggerated, insisting people were too sensitive. That was when the chair gestured toward me. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "as the majority shareholder and owner, would you like to comment?" The room went silent. Richard turned toward me slowly, his face draining of color. "Owner?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. I met his gaze calmly. "Yes," I said. "The company you work for." The shock on his face was not loud. It was devastating. In that moment, years of mockery, dismissal, and arrogance collapsed inward. He opened his mouth, closed it, searched for words that would not come. The chair continued, explaining the structure of ownership, the trust, my role behind the scenes. Every sentence landed like a quiet reckoning. Richard looked around the room, realizing everyone else already knew. That he was the only one who did not. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I spoke only once more. "This meeting is not personal," I said evenly. "It is about behavior. The same standards apply to everyone." Richard was placed on immediate leave pending investigation. No shouting. No insults. Just consequences. As the meeting ended, people stood, gathering papers, murmuring softly. Richard remained seated, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. Outside the boardroom, he finally spoke, his voice cracked with disbelief. "You let me think you were nothing," he said. I stopped and faced him. "I never let you think that," I replied. "You chose to believe it." He tried to apologize then, stumbling over words, blaming stress, ignorance, fear. I listened quietly and then said the only thing that mattered. "Respect does not arrive after power is revealed," I said. "It should have existed when you thought I had none." That afternoon, I packed the rest of my things and moved into a small apartment I had already arranged. Richard sent messages, then long emails, then silence. The investigation concluded weeks later. His position was terminated. Not because of me, but because of his actions. I did not intervene. Ownership does not mean favoritism. It means responsibility. In the months that followed, my life grew quieter and fuller. I stepped back into parts of myself I had set aside, not to prove anything, but to live honestly. I was no longer just a housewife. And I never had been. The difference was that now, I no longer needed anyone else to see it for it to be true. If you are listening to this and have ever been mocked, diminished, or underestimated by someone who should have loved you, remember this. Silence is not weakness. And power does not always announce itself. Sometimes, It waits until the moment truth is unavoidable. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share where you are listening from and whether you have ever been underestimated by someone who later realized the truth. Your voice matters here.